I came home a full day early from a job 2 states away, let myself into my own dark apartment at midnight, and found my neighbor sitting at my kitchen table in the dark. My cat asleep in her lap and a mug of tea gone cold in front of her, like she'd been waiting hours for someone who wasn't supposed to come. She didn't jump. She didn't scramble to explain. She just lifted her head and looked at me with eyes scraped raw and said, very quietly, "You weren't supposed to be back till Sunday." Like that was the problem. Like being found was somehow worse than whatever had put her at my kitchen table at midnight in the first place. I had just spent 11 hours driving home early for a reason I had refused to say out loud the entire length of the highway. Standing in my own doorway looking at her, I finally ran out of road to not say it on. My name is Cal Bremer. I'm 36. I install commercial kitchens for a living. The big stainless build-outs behind restaurant doors. The prep lines and walk-ins and triple sinks that nobody who eats the food ever sees. It's good work, and it takes me out of town in stretches. A week here, 10 days there. Learning the water stains on the ceilings of motels in cities I'll never visit again. I wasn't lonely. I had a job that needed me somewhere else most of the time, which turns out to be a very convenient thing to own when you'd rather not look too hard at what you've got back home. What I had back home, mostly, was Brisket. Brisket is a cat, a large, opinionated, deeply ungrateful cat I did not so much adopt as lose a prolonged military conflict to. And Brisket is the entire reason I know Cora at all. 2 years ago, he slipped out into the hall while I was wrestling groceries through the door, and I didn't notice for the better part of a day. And the very first time I ever spoke to the woman who lived across from me, it was because she was standing at my door near 11 at night, holding my cat out at arm's length like a subpoena. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, "and I'd like it on the record that he started it." No hello. That was Cora. That was the whole beginning, and looking back, it told me everything about her in one sentence. She led with the joke, so you wouldn't notice she'd already done you the kindness of bringing your cat home. Cora worked nights. She was a dispatcher. The steady voice on the other end of the phone during the worst few minutes of strangers' lives, 8 and 10 hours at a stretch, talking people through the things that happened between midnight and dawn. Then she'd come home as the rest of the building was starting its coffee, while I, half the time, was 3 states away. We were on opposite clocks, and I was gone for weeks running, and somewhere in the gaps we'd built the kind of friendship that exists entirely in hallways and odd hours. Borrowed sugar, a fed cat, a long-running dispute over whose turn it was to drag the recycling down. She left her shoes outside her door, soft gray slip-ons, the kind you can stand in for 9 hours without crying about it. I'd learned to read them like a signal flag. Shoes in the hall meant she was home. Shoes gone meant she was somewhere being calm for somebody who couldn't be. I'd given her a key. For Brisket, I told myself, for the weeks I traveled, so the cat wouldn't starve out of spite. It was about the cat. I told myself it was about the cat so many separate times that it genuinely never occurred to me to ask who I thought I was arguing with. You don't keep defending a thing nobody's accusing you of. This last trip had been a bad one, and not because of the work. The work was fine. The work is always fine. I install a kitchen, I test the gas, I shake a manager's hand, I drive to a motel. It was me. I'd been useless the whole 10 days, standing in a stranger's half-built restaurant at the other end of the country, thinking about a hallway, thinking about gray shoes by a door, thinking about the specific way Cora said my name like it had one too many syllables, and she resented every one of them. I lay on a motel bed staring at the ceiling and tried to do the thing I'm good at, talking myself out of it. And for the first time in my adult life, the thing wouldn't take. I told myself I was just tired. You can tell a man's in trouble by the size of the lie he's willing to accept. So I finished the job a day ahead, told my crew I'd see them Monday, and drove 11 hours straight through the dark without letting myself name the reason, because naming it would have meant admitting I was driving home to a person and not a place. I'd built 100 kitchens. I could plumb a 4-bay sink in my sleep. I could not. It was turning out. Ask one simple question out loud. So instead, I drove. Her shoes were in the hall when I got off the elevator. Outside my door, not hers. That was the first thing that landed wrong. I stood there in the dead quiet hallway with my bag over my shoulder, looking at a pair of gray slip-ons sitting neatly outside the wrong apartment, and something in my chest went very still and very alert at the same time. I put my key in my own lock as quietly as a man can, and I opened my own door, and the place smelled like home with one thing added: chamomile. The tea she drank, going cold in the dark. And there she was at my table, with my cat and her raw eyes and the sentence about Sunday. And I understood, before I understood anything else, that whatever had happened, she had come here. Not to a friend's. Not to her own bed 12 feet away. Here, I set my bag down on the floor. I didn't ask why she was in my kitchen at midnight. I didn't ask if she was okay, because I could see that she wasn't, and asking would only have made her perform an answer. I pulled out the chair across from her, and I sat down in my own coat, and I said, "Sunday got boring." That's the truth of what I came home to. I just didn't have the rest of the words yet. I want to be honest about what I did and didn't know. Sitting there. I didn't know what had put her in that chair. But I knew, the moment I sat down across from her, exactly why I'd driven 11 hours, and it had nothing to do with the job, and nothing to do with Sunday being boring, and the knowing arrived all at once. The way a level finally settles and tells you a thing has been crooked the whole time you've been standing on it. I told myself it didn't have to mean anything yet. I told myself a man can drive home early to feed his own cat, Brisket, who had not stirred from her lap and who had ignored me for 2 years, lifted his head, looked at me with open contempt, and went back to sleep against her like he'd already chosen. Even the cat had stopped believing me. It came out slowly, over the next hour, in the way real things come out, sideways, in pieces, separated by long silences neither of us rushed to fill. She'd worked a brutal stretch, 6 nights running. The last shift had ended around 4 that morning with a call that hadn't gone the way you want a call to go, the kind that doesn't clock out when you do, the kind she wasn't going to describe to me, and I wasn't going to ask her to. She'd driven home in the gray light. She'd taken her shoes off in the hall the way she always did. And then, she said, she'd stood between our 2 doors with her own keys in her hand, and she could not make herself go into her own apartment. Because her apartment was just quiet, and quiet was the one thing in the world she couldn't be alone with after a night like that. So she'd used the key. For the cat, she said, and almost smiled at the word, because she'd caught the lie in the same instant I did. She'd let herself in to feed Brisket at 5 in the morning, and then she'd sat down at my kitchen table just for a minute, just to be somewhere that wasn't silent, because it was the only room in the building that felt like a person who would have asked how the night went. And then it had been midnight, and she hadn't moved, and she hadn't slept, and she hadn't eaten, and she had lost an entire day sitting in the chair of a man who was supposed to be in another state, narrating, I think, the worst of it to a cat, because the cat was the only one in the building licensed to hear it. "I was going to be gone before you got back," she said. "You weren't supposed to see this." She meant the chair, the cold tea, the day she'd lost. She meant the version of herself that needed somewhere to land. I'm the one who's fine. That's the whole arrangement. I'm the calm one. People call me when everything they love is on fire, and I am the voice that does not shake. Her own voice shook on the final word, exactly once, and she pressed her lips together and stared at the table like it had given her up. I have, I'll remind you, no business in a kitchen. I build them, and I leave. I own 4 pans, and I have used 1. But I got up, because I had to do something with my hands, or I was going to do something with my mouth too soon, and I made her eggs and toast at 1 in the morning, badly, narrating my own incompetence under my breath. A man who has installed 40 professional ranges fighting his own $4 toaster to a draw, and the small, ridiculous noise of it seemed to let something out of the room. She watched me from the table with the cat still refusing to leave her, and she didn't offer to help, which was its own kind of progress, because Cora helped everyone, always, first, and sitting still while someone made her toast was about the most naked thing I'd ever seen her do. I put the plate in front of her. I sat back down. And for a while neither of us said anything at all. She ate slowly. Brisket relocated to the tabletop, which he is categorically not allowed to do, and I let it go, because some rules are only for ordinary nights. The radiator ticked. Somewhere below us a door closed, and a stairwell light buzzed on and off. I watched her eat the bad eggs of a man who couldn't cook, and I felt the strangest thing I have ever felt in my own kitchen, which was that the room had finally come out to the right size. 2 years of build-outs, of laying out other people's perfect kitchens down to the millimeter, of standing in gleaming finished rooms that fit their drawings exactly, and I had never once stood in a room and felt it fit until I stood in my own dented little one at 1 in the morning, watching a worn-out woman feed half her toast to my cat. She didn't talk, and I didn't make her. I cleared the pan I'd wrecked. I refilled her water without asking. At some point her shoulders, which she'd been holding up around her ears for I'd guess about 6 nights, came down an inch, just an inch. The kind of thing you'd miss if you hadn't spent 2 years learning to read a person across a hallway. I caught it. I didn't say anything about it. There are moments you point at, and there are moments you protect by pretending not to have seen, and I was finally, after a lot of practice at the wrong things, getting the difference right. She set her fork down. She lined it up very carefully with the edge of the plate, the way you arrange the small thing when the big thing is too heavy to hold. And she broke the quiet first. I think we both already knew she would. "You want to know the part that scares me," she said, not looking up. It wasn't the call. I've taken 1,000 bad calls. It's that when it was over and I was standing in that hallway and I couldn't go into my own place, the door I wanted to open was yours. Not a friend. Not my sister. Yours, and you weren't even here. She finally lifted her eyes. I let myself into an empty apartment because being near your stuff was closer to you than being near anyone who was actually home. Do you understand how insane that is? I sat in your kitchen for 19 hours because it was the nearest I could get to a person I've spent 2 years deciding I'm not allowed to want. That landed. That did something quiet and permanent to the whole room. I went still. The body knows before the mouth catches up, and mine knew. My throat closed, and I made myself wait through it because I wanted to mean the next thing more than I'd ever meant anything, and the next thing could not be clever. Clever was just hiding with better branding, and I'd done 2 years of that already. And then I did the hardest thing, which was hold the door open for her. Cora, you can stay tonight and we never talk about this again. I'll have come home Sunday. You'll have fed the cat. We go back to the hallway and the sugar and the recycling, and nobody ever has to know either of us said a true thing out loud. I held her eyes and didn't look away. I mean it. You get to decide this, not me. I've made a whole career out of waiting in other people's empty rooms. I can wait in mine. She didn't take it. She pushed the plate aside instead, which for Cora was the equivalent of standing up on a table and shouting. "I'm so tired of being the calm one," she said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle on the last word. Something in me settled true, the way a thing does when you finally shimmed it level after fighting it all day. "I drove 11 hours tonight," I said. I told my crew it was the schedule. It wasn't the schedule. There was nothing wrong with the job. There was something wrong with the motel, which was that you weren't anywhere near it, and I lay there for 10 nights failing to talk myself out of the fact that the only room I wanted to be in was the one across the hall from you. My voice went rough, and I let it. I gave you that key 2 years ago and told myself it was for the cat. Cora, it was never about the cat. When something goes right on a job, you're the first person I want to call, and the last one I let myself. When something goes wrong, it's already your door I'm picturing. I came home early because I finally couldn't stand being a person who lives 12 feet away from you and calls it neighbors. Her eyes went bright and absolutely unguarded. The calm voice gone, the armor on the floor with the gray shoes, and her fingers tightened once, hard, around the edge of the table, and she made a sound that was half a laugh and half the other thing. "Say the part about the cat again," she said. "I want it on the record." I reached across my own kitchen table and took her hand off the edge of it. Just took it. The way you collect a thing that's been yours the whole time and you're finally done leaving out, and I held on. That was all. At first. Her hand in mine over the wreckage of bad eggs. 2 people who'd run a 2-year border patrol across one narrow hallway, and finally, quietly, abandoned their posts. And then Brisket, who had been watching all of this with the flat judgment of a much older relative, stood up on the table, walked directly through the middle of the moment, knocked the cold mug of tea into the sink with one deliberate paw, and sat down on my forearm like he was claiming the territory before either of us could. Cora laughed for real then, finally, wetly, into her free hand. "He planned that. He's been planning it for 2 years," I said. "He's the only one in this building who ever had a strategy, and he ran it on both of us at once." 3 months later, her gray shoes lived outside my door more often than hers, and then one week they just stopped going back across the hall at all. She still worked nights. She still came home wrecked, sometimes, from calls she couldn't shake, but now she came home, all the way home, to a kitchen with the light left on, and a man who'd learned to make eggs slightly less badly, and a cat who slept on whoever needed him most, which was usually her. She was still the calm one for everybody else. She just stopped having to be the calm one for herself, alone, in a quiet apartment, at dawn. A year after that, we knocked the wall. Not the one between our 2 units, that's not how leases work, but the one we'd each built up over 2 years of deciding the timing was wrong and the proximity was dangerous, and you can't risk it with someone you have to share a hallway with. Turned out, you could. Turned out the sharing was the whole point. Years later, when people ask how the 2 of us got together, and they always ask, because we were neighbors for 2 years first and never said a word makes people lean in, she tells the version where she got caught having a breakdown in a man's kitchen. And I tell the version where I drove 11 hours through the night for a reason I wouldn't admit, and walked in on the best thing that ever happened to me, asleep at my own table with my cat. We argue, in front of company, about which of us was the bigger coward. She says she only came in for the cat. I tell everyone present that nobody sits in an empty kitchen for 19 hours for a cat. Nothing about us ever really changed. She's still the steady voice in everyone else's worst minutes. I still leave for job sites and learn the ceilings of motels in other cities, except now I come home early on purpose and say so out loud. The only real difference is that when I get off the elevator now, her gray shoes are by our door, and I've stopped pretending I don't know exactly what it means that they're there. It wasn't new. The thing between us, it had been sitting at the kitchen table the whole time, waiting. It had just, finally, stopped pretending it had come for the cat. So, what would you have done if you'd come home early and found the person you'd quietly loved for 2 years sitting in your dark kitchen, undone, caught in the act of needing you? Would you have asked all the questions, or would you have just sat down? And have you ever been the calm one for everybody else for so long that you forgot you were allowed to have a door of your own to fall through? Tell me your story down in the comments. If this one found you tonight, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.